On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA and a big name in conservative circles, was shot and killed at Utah Valley University. He was speaking to a crowd when it happened. It was shocking. Is this just a tragic, isolated event, or is it a warning sign that political violence is growing in the United States? In this video, we're going to look at decades of data, public opinion surveys, peer-reviewed studies, and some recent events. The big question: are we entering a new era of political violence? Who's involved? And why now? I'll show you the data. How many Americans actually think violence is justified for political goals? And honestly, the number might surprise you. We'll also compare the United States with other democracies. Is America really an outlier, or just the loudest? I'll walk you through what researchers think the next 5 years could look like, and it's not the Civil War story you see all over social media. Stick around, because once you see the data, you might never look at the headlines the same way again. As I dug into this, I found my own assumptions challenged, more than once, and I think you will too. And hey, if you want more videos that break down what's really happening, subscribe to the briefing room and help the channel grow. Go ahead, hit that button now. Let's get into it. What happened with Charlie Kirk? And why does it matter? Let's break it down. On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk, just 31, was speaking at Utah Valley University. That's when he was shot. There were about 3,000 people in the crowd. It was a packed event. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson was arrested Thursday night, September 11th. That's less than 36 hours after the shooting. Officials say Robinson's father recognized him from surveillance footage and called the authorities. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed the arrest happened at 10 p.m. local time. Robinson is being held waiting on federal charges. According to PolitiFact, Kirk's assassination followed a string of violent incidents in 2025. There was the fatal shooting of Minnesota State Rep Melissa Hortman, and the firebombing of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence. It's not just one event. These incidents are part of a troubling pattern. So why is this more than just another headline? It hits a lot of triggers. A public figure, on a university campus. It's symbolic. Speech events are becoming flashpoints in our heated political culture. It makes you wonder, is this a turning point, or just more of the same? Political violence expert Ari Perliger, from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, has studied political assassinations across democracies. In an interview with The Conversation, he warned, "Political assassinations come in waves. They create legitimization and acceptance. This will not end here." That's a serious warning. It's not just about one person, it's about what comes next. Perliger's concern? Kirk's killing could embolden others, on the extreme fringes, left or right, to see violence as a valid form of political action. But when did this really start? To answer that, we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. America's history of political violence. This goes way back. Think about the 1960s, civil rights struggles, political assassinations like Kennedy and MLK. It's not new, it's part of the country's story. And then, you've got decades of protests and riots, though honestly, a lot were non-violent. What's really changed? The scale, the tools we use to communicate, and how the public sees it all. After 9/11, the United States focused a lot more on Islamist terrorism. But lately, right-wing and anti-government extremism, that's gotten a lot more attention from researchers. But history is just one piece of the puzzle. What's actually happening right now with trends and numbers? Let's check out the data. So, in 2024, Princeton's Bridging Divides initiative recorded over 600 incidents of threats and harassment against local officials. That's a 74% increase from 2022. And get this, U.S. Capitol Police investigated 9,474 threat assessment cases against members of Congress in 2024. That's up 18% from 2023. And it's nearly triple the number of threats from back in 2017. A reader's analysis found more than 300 cases of political violence between the Capitol riot and the 2024 election. That's the biggest surge since the 1970s. And according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, there were 3 times as many partisan-driven attacks and plots between 2016 and 2023 as there were in the previous 25 years. Numbers like these raise another question. What do everyday Americans actually think about political violence? Let's take a look. A study published in 2025 in the journal Injury Epidemiology led by Dr. Wintemute and his colleagues, looked at trends from 2022 to 2024. The researchers found that in 2022, there was already concern about Americans' willingness to support or even carry out violence. That number dipped slightly in 2023, but in 2024, support remained significant in certain ideological groups. Another survey in 2024 asked Americans about the possibility of civil war. About 13.7%, so a little over 1 in 10, strongly or very strongly agreed that, in the next few years, a civil war might actually happen. That's not a majority, but the number might surprise you. There's also a 2024 survey by PRI. Fewer than 1 in 5 Americans agree with statements like, "True patriots may have to resort to violence to save our country." That's 16%. Or, "If the election is compromised, everyday Americans will need to ensure the rightful leader takes office, even if violence is needed." Again, 16%. So, most people don't agree with those ideas, but that's still millions of people. It's a minority, but it's not a tiny fringe. These numbers matter, even if they're not the majority. It's a warning sign, not a prediction. To bring some balance here, these surveys show concern and real support in slices of the population, but they're not showing that most Americans want political violence. The majority still reject it. That contrast is important. Most people, even in tense times, still say no to violence. That's worth remembering. So, who exactly are the people behind these acts? And what motivates them? We'll dig into that next. The actors and the ideologies behind them. Far-right extremism, anti-government beliefs, are often the most prominent in violent incidents or threats. But left-wing extremist acts, racially motivated hate crimes, and identity-based violence, they're also part of the picture. Lone actors are also common. Many fatal events are carried out by individuals, not organized groups. Social or political grievances, sometimes mental health issues, those often factor in. Threats, intimidation, and non-fatal acts are rising. Vandalism, harassment, political threats, whether on social media or in person, data from surveys, and from law enforcement, show that people who feel marginalized or distrust institutions are more likely to justify or support political violence in theory. But motivations don't exist in a vacuum. Let's ask the deeper question, why now? Why does this moment feel more volatile than before? Causes and contributing factors. So let's talk about social media, echo chambers, and misinformation. Algorithms push extreme content, sometimes without us even noticing. Fringe groups? They can radicalize much faster these days. There are studies that actually trace how extremist content gets coordinated before big events. It's wild, right? Polarization and distrust. A lot of people in surveys say they think the system is rigged. Many believe their political opponents aren't just wrong, they're actually immoral, or even enemies. That's a big shift. And when you feel that way, threats, harsh rhetoric, even violence, they start to seem more acceptable, at least to some. Research from Dr. Wintemute's team shows that your ideological identity, how you see yourself, really connects to whether you support political violence. Political polarization isn't new, but today it's supercharged by social media, by partisan news, and by those algorithmic echo chambers. According to Pew Research, by 2020, 45% of Republicans and 41% of Democrats saw the other party very unfavorably. That's way up from just 17 and 16% back in 1994. That's a huge change. And when political opponents are seen not just as wrong but as dangerous, violence becomes a lot easier to justify. If this is making sense so far, tap the like and hit subscribe to help grow the channel. Thank you. Back to the video. Economic stress, inequality, demographic change. It's complicated. People under financial strain are more likely to buy into grievance stories. Surveys show that when people's financial situation gets better, their support for violence actually drops. There's a study from 2025 called Life Events and Change in Support for Political Violence that found Americans whose financial well-being improved were less likely to increase their support for violence. So, money matters. Mental health and isolation. Now, I'm not saying mental illness equals violence, far from it. But studies do show that people who feel socially isolated, who don't have strong personal connections, are more likely to endorse violence or accept threats. That's from work published by Dr. Wintemute and his colleagues in Injury Epidemiology. Campus politics and speaker events. Universities have always been hotspots for free speech debates. Lately, there's been a rise in threats around speaker events, counter-protests, and even violence near campuses. Charlie Kirk's event? It's an extreme. If this feels uniquely American, it's worth asking. How does the United States compare to other democracies facing similar pressures? US versus Europe. A lot of other democracies are seeing the same trends. More political polarization, more extremist activity, more threats of violence. For example, in Western Europe, you've got extremist groups involved in violent acts or even terror plots. It's not just an American thing. Some places, like the Nordic countries or Germany, are dealing with radicalization too. But here's the difference. They've got strong systems in place. Things like de-radicalization programs, better safety nets, and a lot more trust in their institutions. That seems to help keep things from getting out of hand. Trust in government and those social safety nets really matter. Countries where people trust their leaders, get involved in their communities, and where there's less inequality, well, they tend to see less support for political violence. That's what studies from Pew and the European Social Survey are showing. But on a per capita basis, the United States still stands out. There's just more overt, lethal political violence here, partly because guns are more accessible, and there's a longer history of civilian political violence than in most European democracies. Looking at other countries helps put things in perspective. But the big question everyone wants answered is, where do we go from here? What happens next? If these trends keep going and there's no big change, experts warn things could get worse. We could see more high-profile political assassinations or shootings at political events. Not just rare, isolated cases, events that grab everyone's attention, more threats to public figures, more security worries, especially at campuses and public speeches. It's not just about politicians, it's about anyone in the spotlight. And then there's the normalization of violent talk. If threats and violence become just another headline, public outrage might fade away. That's a real risk. Division could get even deeper. This us versus them mindset, if it keeps growing, could lead to cycles that just keep escalating, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are things the government can do. Stronger enforcement against threats, hate crimes, and political violence. Civic education, like media literacy and building up local communities, can help rebuild trust. And then regulating digital platforms, moderating hate speech, keeping an eye on extremist content. All of that matters. Now I know, this is all tied to how we got here in the first place. But we'll dig into that in another video where we'll really unpack the free speech debate. What's clear right now? The government needs to act. And fast. There's no time to waste. But here's the big question. Can we really trust the government to do all that, if people see them as part of the problem? Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. Still, before we jump to the worst-case scenario, let's pause. Sometimes the data doesn't show us everything, or things just aren't clear in all the chaos. The balanced view and full picture. Most Americans, they don't support political violence. Survey data shows the majority reject statements like, violence is justified for patriots, and so on. That's from PRRI and Wintemute's research. A lot of these incidents are non-fatal, with low casualty numbers. The dramatic events, they get way more media coverage than the more common but less lethal ones. Causality is tough to pin down. Does polarization cause violence? Or does violence and political rhetoric deepen polarization? Honestly, they feed into each other. Some studies say we might be overestimating support for partisan or extremist violence just because of how the questions are asked. For example, there's a study called Current Research Overstates American Support for Partisan Violence. Westwood and his colleagues argued that a lot of survey questions actually inflate support just by the wording. So, real support? It may be lower than it looks. So, with all that in mind, what does it really tell us, and where do we go from here? The United States has seen a troubling rise in political violence. Pause and think about that. But it isn't yet the apocalypse that headlines suggest. Most Americans still reject violence. But the fact that millions openly say they'd consider it, well, that's a warning sign we can't ignore. Compared with other democracies, the United States is more polarized and more armed. That's a dangerous combination. Researchers say the next 5 years will likely bring more flashpoints, but not a collapse into chaos. The real question isn't just, will there be violence? It's whether Americans across left, right, and center can rebuild enough trust to stop political conflict from spilling over into bloodshed. Charlie Kirk's killing is a painful marker. It's a reminder that the line between rhetoric and violence can be crossed. What we do with this matters. Society, media, platforms, we all need to avoid sensationalism. We need better mental health support, more social cohesion, economic opportunity, and ways to foster civic trust. What do you think? Are we witnessing a real surge of political violence, or mostly isolated tragedies that get amplified by media? Share what you've experienced or seen below. The more perspectives, the better. If this breakdown helped you understand the shape of the issues at hand, subscribe for more videos like this. And if you know someone who's worried about where things are going, share this with them. We need more calm, informed conversation than fear. Thanks for watching.